There is the historian's mortal sin. And this is something even greater and more dangerous than a fallacy. It is anachronism. And there are two ways of viewing it as just as the historian's mortal sin. There's the sort of scientific, oh, heaven forbid I ever get any fact right or ever get any fact wrong idea. Ultimately, anachronism comes down to factual inaccuracy, but it does that's the short definition. It is far more than that. So, usually when we think of anachronism, academically, when we think of anachronism, say you're watching a movie, a Western, that is set in, I don't know, we'll say 1870.
Okay.
And every character in that Western is carrying a Colt single action army. Well, the Colt Single Action Army didn't come out until I think 1872. That was not a widely sold firearm until 1872.
Okay.
That is typically how we think of anachronism. But there is a much more sinister and much more dangerous way that anachronism is practiced, and it is very much ignored broadly in the historical community, unfortunately. And it is when you impose your own morality and your own ideas on somebody else in the past. The most common version of this is, at least the one that people will probably think of when I say this, is the American South in the Civil War, the antebellum South. Well, they were all bad people because they owned slaves.
And so slavery bad.
And slavery bad, so slave owners bad. Therefore, they're bad people. Well, it's not that simple. Not exactly that easy to answer. General Robert E. Lee owned a lot of slaves. But I personally still think him to be the finest man ever to wear a uniform in any man's army, especially in the army of this United States and in the Confederate States. He's the finest man ever in uniform.
Okay. Why is that?
Yeah, he owned slaves, but he was just a good man. You look at his life, you read about him, you read the letters that he wrote, the things that he said. He was just a good man. Yeah, he owned slaves. That was perfectly normal and acceptable for basically everybody at the time. So me, for one, I don't look at the fact that they owned slaves. I looked at how they treated their slaves, or how it was recorded that people actively treated their slaves, or how slaves were treated under that particular person.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're allowing your taskmasters to treat your slaves very poorly, then you're a poor master.
Yeah.
Or if you yourself are treating them poorly, then you're a bad master. You're a terrible person if you are beating your slaves. But General Lee had a clause in his will, his last will and testament, that all of his slaves would be freed upon his death. That they would all be given irrevocable papers of emancipation. And that was the same idea that his father had had. And I think his grandfather before him, who had fought side by side with George Washington.
But wait, Robert E. Lee fought the North, and the North was trying to free slaves. And
the North wasn't necessarily. We won't get into that. We have an entire. We'll have an entire episode on the Civil War in which we'll have a good friend of ours join us, and maybe a couple of other people join us. But the North wasn't exactly the righteous liberators that you thought they were. We'll just go with that.
Yeah. For now, we'll say things are complicated. And like you said with Robert E. Lee, you shouldn't. I mean, if your entire culture said this was normal, like you said.
Your economy relies on it.
Yeah. So
like the economy of the South and the economy of the greater United States before the war relied on slavery. When your country's GDP relies on slavery, you're going to have a hard time saying that it's a bad thing.
Exactly. So can you really blame somebody for that? I don't know. Like a similar example in my head would be people that are on birth control. Most forms of birth control are
Yeah.
abortion, and I believe abortion is murder. And that
Well,
it
and even
is
the
a
ones that aren't, it's just wrong.
yeah, it's wrong for other grave reasons, but yeah, abortion and birth control are horribly grave evils. Do I think that you're a horrible person if you use birth control? No. Rare would it be that you actually are for that reason. Because if that's all you've been taught growing up, that this is fine and to be expected, why wouldn't you think differently?
And that was just normal for, it was actually the majority of women for the latter half of the 20th century just took birth control because that was just supposedly the normal thing that you would do.
Mm-hmm.
And the Catholics were the only one who were objecting to it. And not even all Catholics, just some Catholics
Mm-hmm.
were the only ones who objected to it. So while it is a grave moral evil, if all you know is what the world tells you, and the world tells you that it's not and that it's fine and that it's even something you should do, I will never hold that against you
Mm-hmm.
because I treat you like a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And human beings should be treated with understanding, even if they're dead. Just
Yep.
people of the past. That's why we call them the people of the past, not the figures of the past, not the characters of the past. They are the people of the past.
Yep.
They were human beings, they were flawed. Some things were unavoidable. They did things wrong. But it's best if you just approach it with the idea that they did the best with what they had.
Yeah, and if you accept for yourself that, like, when you die, 50 years later, people may come to some sort of understanding about morality that, um, no, that in this one manner or something, you were actually very, 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 very much in the wrong. Like, how would you want to be remembered? With the respect that you're owed.
Be remembered by how you were right.
Yeah, with the respect and with the humanity with which you're owed. We're not calling evil good in this case. We're just calling you a
No,
human being.
evil is still evil. And I'll still say slavery isn't evil.
Yeah.
Slavery is wrong. Slavery is an offense to the dignity of the human person. When you treat a human being like property, that is wrong.
Yeah.
But I've actually done my research as a historian and I understand how people back then thought. And that's the kind of anachronism that I'm talking about, the very, very dangerous kind, which is when you impose your own ideas and your own morality on them, which is also an incredibly cynical thing to do, by the way. And a good example of this, I'll go back to the movies for this. The movie Kingdom of Heaven.
I remember watching that
Only
in
ever,
college and not being impressed.
yeah, you and I saw it at the same time, and you were not impressed. I was nauseated. That movie is good up until Liam Neeson dies
Okay.
in like the first 15 minutes. After that, basically everybody in that entire movie thinks like a modern person except the king. The king is the only person in that entire movie who genuinely believes what he is saying. And when you are writing a movie and it comes to the point where you have a night hospitaller during a crusade, the Second Crusade, basically saying that he doesn't even believe in God, you have done something horribly wrong.
Mm-hmm. For all
You
the
don't
obvious
even
reasons.
understand what the night hospitallers were. They were monks with swords, which is about as awesome and badass as you can
Yeah.
possibly
Say
get.
that's pretty
And
dope.
and I'll be one of the first people to call for a revival of the militant orders. But when you have a Knight Hospitaller basically saying that he doesn't believe in God, and a high-ranking Knight Templar basically pretty much admitting that he's only in it for the money in the land, you have done something terribly wrong because you are looking at that and looking at the bare bones facts of what happened. And yeah, corrupt people exist. Yes, evil people exist. Yes, there are always people who say one thing and think something different. That's entirely
Mm-hmm.
true. But when
Yep.
you think that every time somebody believes something, and then believe something different, that is cynicism. And when you do it to somebody in the past, that's a terrible anachronism. And you have just imposed your own ideas on that person.